Welcome to the Counseling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Lise Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and today I'm flying solo while my co-host Ken takes a well-earned break. A thriving private practice depends on a steady flow of potential clients reaching out to you. Many therapists choose to have a website to showcase their professional experience and specialisms such as online working, being trauma-informed, or even having training to work with autistic clients. With that in mind, I'm delighted to welcome back Daragh McLaughlin from Web Healer, who will be sharing his valuable insights on how to avoid common pitfalls when managing your website and digital assets. So Daragh, welcome back.
Hey Rory, how's it going? And hi to all the listeners out there. Thanks for having me and really excited to talk about this important topic today.
Yes. Now, I think a lot of people might be listening, Daragh, and thinking, I might want a website. It could be students. It could be a student who's thinking, I'm going to graduate and maybe I want to go into private practice, or a seasoned professional who wants to kind of update their profile and attract more clients. So I guess the first thing is when someone's reaching out for a web designer, what kind of red flags might we come across that might give us a pause for thought and think, maybe I need to go in a different direction? What do we need to watch out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think today we're going to maybe look at a couple of different areas when it comes to your website and digital assets. And we'll talk about what your digital asset might be. But a website is a digital asset, Rory, because it belongs to you. It's just like, say, your treatment room, your therapy room where you see clients. It's something that facilitates your business. So I think when you decide that you want to move forward with an asset like a website to promote your business, you need to look out for certain things along the way. And, it starts with the very first phone call to your potential website design partner. Maybe they're a company found on the internet. Maybe it's a business that has been referred by a colleague. Maybe it's even a friend of a friend's son. You need to be looking out for what we consider to be red flags, because, Rory, every week we hear from counselors and psychotherapists who've had a bad experience with a designer or design company. And in most of the cases, we can pinpoint maybe one of these red flags that they missed. And unfortunately, they're now paying the price. So today's chat, I suppose, is just all about helping you mitigate those things. So talking about red flags, what are these red flags? So, first of all, when you make an inquiry to a new provider, I would like to think that they get back to you incredibly fast because they should be eager to do business with you. So if you're seeing prompt responses to your emails, this indicates we're open for business, we're happy to work with you, and we're communicative. And not only that, but we have the team here to be able to answer your queries promptly. Because if you need some information, maybe you're between clients and you don't have time to pick up the phone and have a long conversation, you might want to just fire off a quick email between sessions. And so you want to know that you're going to get a response back, same day, early the next day, certainly within one business day. I think that's a very reasonable turnaround time. And I think it's something that you need to watch out for. So the red flag here is if you're trying to do business with somebody anew and they're taking days or more than a week to get back to you, the question would be, what is it going to be like maybe when you really need help, or when the going gets tough, or if there are delays in the design process? You really need to be confident that they're, very communicative. Another red flag there to look out for is the lack of a formal contract or agreement. So if you're looking to get a website built, for example, and you're asking what's included, and you're getting responses which are not structured, they're not a list of bullet points. This is what's included. This is what's not included, or it's not clear. It's a little bit vague. I would also be concerned because at the end of the day, Rory, the listeners are professional counselors and psychotherapists. How are they to know all the ins and outs of a website? They don't, and they can't, and I certainly wouldn't expect them to. So it's incumbent on the designer to list out everything that's included and everything that's not. And that way, the listeners can make an informed decision as to say, oh, well, I'm going to need somebody to help me with X. You don't provide X. thanks very much, I'll go elsewhere. And that's incredibly important to know at the beginning of the conversation, because the last thing you want to find out is that you're paying a setup fee, a deposit on a website, and 2-3 months later, after you've been through, a good bit of work, that all of a sudden they don't offer this service which you critically need. So I think knowing what's included very early on, before any money changes hands, incredibly important. And then I suppose one of the last bits and pieces from that initial communication is no clear support or maintenance plan. So when you have a website and it's built and everything has gone really well, you want to know what's included after the fact. So it's really important that if I have support, I can email you and I'm going to get a response promptly. Or if I'm having a problem changing something on my website, you're going to help me. Or what's included in the ongoing fee? Is there an ongoing fee? What's included? And more importantly, what's not included? And it's all about being informed at that very early stage in the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's about thinking of your website as a digital asset. It's as much an asset as your qualification is, because you're paying money to get a service, and part of that service is you're getting assets. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about defining what a digital asset is. But it sounds like initially what you're talking about is mitigating risk, mitigating risk of, I guess, losing money or not having a reliable website. So what are the things that we need to think about when we mitigate risks, Daragh?
Well, I think choosing a designer that has a track record, and a designer can be an individual, or it can be a business, or it can be an online service provider. You want to choose a design company that has a track record of completing projects. And ideally, you want a design company that has worked with people in your space so they understand you. Speaking personally, Peter has worked with therapists for 20-something years now at this stage. So when someone says, well, I offer X, or I'm not so sure about Y, yes, we know that. We've heard it before. So we understand the client. You want to work with somebody who really has good understanding of therapists, therapy, counseling, because it just makes the relationship much easier to work. There's a common understanding of what you do know and knowing what you don't know. That's incredibly important. So choosing a designer with a track record of completing projects and references from your colleagues, maybe now is the time to check their Google reviews, Trustpilot reviews, see what other people are saying. Maybe reach out to your own ethical body. See if this company's name has come up in any of their forums, magazines, discussions, events. Has anybody ever heard of this business before? And I think moving on then, I suppose, when we talk about, okay, you've gotten over the initial hurdle, the person's communicative, you feel good about working with them, you want to make sure that you have an agreement in place and it includes ongoing support. Because like a lot of things, a relationship can be absolutely rosy at the very start. But as time goes by, maybe they're not so concerned about your business anymore because they're too busy building new websites. You want to make sure that in 3, 6, 9, or even 20 months' time, that if you pick up the phone or you email them, that you're going to get support. So it's incredibly important that you have an agreement in place that locks in that ongoing support, so that the support you get on day 100 is the same as you're getting on day 1,000. That's incredibly important. But come back to this first point you made, getting reviews from other clients, and especially people who've maybe used that service provider for multiple years, is incredibly important, because sometimes you can come along to a business and they charge you X, and then next year it's X plus 10, and next year it's X plus 20. So if you can speak to some people who've used a service provider for several years, at least they can say, well, they haven't put up their price, their service has been consistent throughout. They can give you a very fair evaluation of their experience to date, which is really, really important. So there's a couple of mitigating things I think you can do. It primarily revolves around reviews, but also making sure you have your own agreement with that designer in place to make sure that I know what I'm going to get, and I know what I'm going to get during the website design process, but also once the website is designed. That's critical, because that's often where the relationship goes sour between the design provider and the client. It's after the website is built, because a website which is not kept up to date, which you can't edit with critical information. What happens if your phone number changes? You need to be able to manage that website, because a website that has out of date or incorrect information is as damaging as not having a website at all. So it's really important that you have those loose ends tied up in advance.
Yeah, absolutely, Daragh. And I think there's a lot there, isn't there, that perhaps on the surface you wouldn't really think about. I was listening very carefully to what you said, and I thought, gosh, there's just so much information there that perhaps isn't in someone's mind when they go to get a website. Perhaps they're more interested in having a design or having the information. And I guess one of the key questions to ask is about who owns the domain. Now, a domain is the address of the website. So everybody's familiar with counselingtutor.com. That's the domain. We own that domain. But the ownership of the domain is really important. It's a key question, really, to ask during the design process, isn't it?
Yeah, and it comes back to something you said earlier on. Your domain name is probably your most important digital asset. So it's your address. And people sometimes get confused as to what a domain name is. And I always draw the analogy, it's like the address of your house. Without the address of your house, people can't get to your house. And so, you may change your website design, but your address will always stay the same. So owning that or having control over it in some shape or form is incredibly important. So when I would approach a design company, I would always say, well, who owns my domain? Are you registering it under your name, Joe Blogs, or my name, Jane Doe, the therapist? I need to know this. And that's incredibly important because, again, if the relationship breaks down with your designer at some point and you wish to move elsewhere, ownership of your domain is incredibly important. So it's really important at that time to ask, what happens if I want to move my domain name to another provider? And to be fair, Rory, we do get that question from time to time from people, but in the vast majority of cases, people just don't know it's a potential issue down the line. And often the time with other providers, they find out a little bit too late. This week, we had a client who had to pay a £100 release fee to their web designer to move the domain name away because the domain name was registered in the designer's name and not the client's name. And so asking these questions at the very outset prevents those sorts of issues coming to bite you. So who owns the domain name? Whose name is it registered under? What happens if I want to move it to another provider in 2-3 years' time? And who pays for the domain name on an ongoing basis? Because when you register a domain name, your listeners might not know, but it needs to be renewed every year. And it's yours as long as you renew it. And if you don't renew it and it lapses, then somebody else can take it. But what you don't want to find out is that there's a gray area on the domain name that you anticipate the web designer is going to renew it for you. And the web designer thinks you're going to renew it. So it's incredibly important that that is set out in stone early. And you should also ask the designer, can you register the domain name yourself? So, and retain ownership of it and just point it at their service. And in the vast majority of cases, designers will have no issue with that because they should be able to do their thing and it gives you the peace of mind that you own this digital asset. So domain name is incredibly important to manage and maintain it because frankly, Rory, contractually, if the designer registers it in their name, you have absolutely no claim to it. So if that designer departs off the scene for whatever reason, you're high and dry because your digital asset has gone with them.
Yes, and there's a danger there, isn't there? So, if you have a domain name, I'll invent one such as roryleesoakscounselling.com. Please don't search that. It doesn't exist. I hope it doesn't. If it does, send me an email. I want to know about it. But
I'm off to get it now, Rory.
Yeah, you have to do it now. Well, thank you very much for that. That's your name. That's your business's address. It's literally like your home address. And if someone takes control of that, then they can use your name to point to services that they offer, not that you offer. And I know this is, there's been a couple of cases where this has happened, where a domain name has pointed to someone else instead of the person whose name it is. And I think it might be useful just to kind of tease out domain names and pointing, because I think for the uninitiated in the world of the webosphere, that can be a bit confusing. So just help me out here, Daragh. A web address is what we type in. So counselingtutor.com is a web address, and when people type that in, they'd expect to find counselingtutor.com. Yeah, we own that web address. We every so often we renew it, and that web address points to our website. So just talk us through what that pointing is. What does it mean to point at a website?
Well, okay. Well, we're going to have to be very careful here that we don't step over the line of super technical terms. But
yes.
When you have a website, it needs to be pointed at a provider. And without getting into too much technical information, every domain name has what's known as name servers, and you set the name servers on a domain name to those of your provider. So if you're having a website built and you have registered your domain name independently and wish to remain so, you will say to your designer, what are the name servers I need to apply to my domain name? And you will typically do that through your domain name provider. If your web designer is looking after the registration and renewal of the domain name themselves, then they will take care of that. So if you want to be totally hands-off, you can do that. In some cases, we have clients and they have registered the domain name with their own provider, and they say, listen, I don't know what I'm doing here. Here are my logins, just go and do it for me. So have that conversation with your designer, and in most cases, they're more than happy to go in there and do the pointing. So we don't want to get too caught up on the technicalities of the pointing, but every domain name needs to point to a provider. And that's done through this thing called name servers, DNS, it's sometimes known as. You may have heard of it, may have seen it through your existing provider if you have one. And typically speaking, a designer will handle that end to end. Maybe that's a pre-sales question to ask them as well. And say, listen, I'm not happy doing this. Will you do it? Now, the good thing about setting this pointing is that once it's done, it's one and done. You can forget about it. It's a done thing really at that point. So once it's done, and your website should be online. But if your designer is going to register and maintain your domain, albeit in your name, they can register it on your behalf. They can manage it from a technical perspective, but it's ultimately yours. They will look after that pointing for you. So it's not something you need to worry about. And I just want to come back to one thing you said, Rory, about your domain name. If you have your personal name, so RoryLeeSoaksCounselling.com, fantastic domain, and you go about getting listings in directories and on your ethical body websites, and maybe through other websites online, you have people linking over to your website. If for some reason you can no longer use that domain name because your designer has gone off the scene and they don't renew it, and so your website is now offline, all of these links that you've established throughout the internet are now null and void. And obviously that's very frustrating for people who might come across those links and try to click onto your website. But from Google's perspective as well, it's not great. And so Google will say, oh, this person's out of business. They're not around anymore. And you will be forced to start a new website with a new domain name. So RoryLeeSoaksCounselling.com. But in the eyes of Google and the internet, that's effectively a brand new business and has no connection to your previous website address, your digital asset. Therefore, maintaining ownership or maintaining control or contractually being happy that it's registered in your name and you can move it as and when you wish is so important. Yes. Because if you lose access to it, it's very hard to come back from it.
It is. And I think a lot of our listener, I think the listener would probably come across this domain name issue when they click on links. Occasionally on Counselling Tutor, we have it on the bottom of our pages. We have report a non-functioning link, and sometimes we put some links onto external providers and who have in-depth content. They click on the link, and that link then goes to a totally different website or non-website at all because the website's been removed from the link, and that that is the reality of it. Your domain name points to the website. And if the website goes down, people can click on the domain name and they might find any old thing. So it's really, really important that you understand who owns the domain name and where it's heading towards. So what other key questions could we ask during the selection process, Daragh? What other questions are crucial in this?
Okay, so I mean, I think if we zoom out and we look back to this dance with the designer at the very start of the process, so we've sussed them out. We've seen, are they exhibiting any of these red flags, like the lack of the formal contract or agreement? What's included, what's not? How is their communication style? Is it prompt? Is it speaking to you in a language you understand? Is it making you feel at ease with the process? Because you should feel at ease with this process. This is an exciting process. When you're getting a website, you're putting yourself out onto the internet. You are saying, I am open for business. I'm ready to help. I think it's a wonderful thing, and it should be an enjoyable experience. It shouldn't be a fight, as it sometimes can. So when we look at the next stage of the interaction with your designer, we talk about, okay, you've made the decision. I want to proceed. They're going to register the domain name in my name. They're going to manage it. I'm happy with that. Let's now talk about the designing of the website. So what are we looking for here? We're looking for clear project milestones and progress updates. So you want to know what begins when you hand over those credit card digits. What's the next stage? So you should have a very clear picture in your head. What happens next? How long it's going to take? When am I going to hear from you? And what are you going to talk to me about? So what is it I'm going to hear from you about? So let's think about that. So when you sign up, well, am I going to receive a receipt? Am I going to receive an intake questionnaire? Are you going to ask me about my private practice, what I want on my website, the types of the modality that I offer, maybe my qualifications, my ethical body memberships, my color scheme preferences, fonts, or any images that I might have taken, like a professional headshot and so on. So you want to know what's the next stage. So communication, what I'm trying to round on here is communication, because the last thing you want to do is pay over the money and then things go quiet. That's not a good sign, because instantly you've got this enthusiasm, which is then met with silence, and that is a terrible feeling. So we want to understand the project milestones. So I'm going to send you a questionnaire. You're going to fill it out, and within 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 weeks, you're going to receive a draft of your homepage. And at that time, you can review that draft and you can give me feedback. So understanding the milestones is really, really important. The next thing I would look to understand under the heading of communication is, during this process of reviewing milestones, or even just some questions that come to light after you've signed up, how can I get in contact with you? Do you offer email support only? Can I ring a phone number? Do you have an online chat service or something like that? Really, really important that you have the facility and you know how to communicate with your designer. You don't want to have a great rapport with them during the pre-sales, but once they take your money, they're gone off the face of the planet. So I think it's really important to understand how they're going to communicate with you, and not only during the design process, but also once the website goes live. And I think it's important at this stage to ask the question, how many people are within the business? Is it just one person? And that can sometimes be a positive thing, and it can sometimes be a bit of a red flag. What happens if this person is going to Spain on a 3-week holiday, or going off for the Easter break with their kids? Are you going to be left waiting? Can your private practice wait? So I think it's really important to understand the communication offerings of this business and how likely and how promptly it is for you to get a response Monday to Friday, and even at weekends. Some designers will be very upfront and say, listen, sorry, at the weekends, we're closed. If it's something urgent, no problem, but otherwise we're closed. But it's so important to know that if you email somebody on a Monday morning, or you pick up the phone at Monday morning at 9 o'clock, that someone is going to answer it. So knowing the communication offering is incredibly important. So I think some key questions that you can ask, which are the takeaways from this particular area, is, how do you handle urgent requests? Do you offer maintenance packages or retainers, and how do I access those? So if I want to make a change to my website, how do I communicate that with you? How do you approach handoff or training maybe when the project is complete? So if the website is built, are you going to say, your website's built, thanks, bye? Or are you going to say, I'm available to guide you through the website at any point, and we can do a Zoom, a screen share, or I can simply send you a guide for how to make very simple edits to the website, should you so wish to do so yourself, if it's a thing that they're not included as part of your retainer. And I think, coming back to what I said earlier on, what are your hours of business? And what are the realistic turnaround times for any support I need? So if I send you an email on Monday morning, will I receive a response on Monday or will it be Friday? And I think getting an understanding, you'll know straight away. So if someone says, well, I'm going to respond to you within typically a couple of hours, then you'll know that they're pretty prompt. If they said, 1 to 2 business days, that could then drift. A couple of hours could drift to a day, which is still very acceptable. 2 to 3 days could drift to 3 to 4 days, which is less acceptable. So it's important to know that early on in the process. So I think just to summarize there, communication and gauging the responsiveness of the designer, the design company is really, really important. So at all times, you know what you're dealing with and you don't have any unrealistic expectations as to when you'll get support or when a change will be made to your website when you need it. If you've been advised, for example, by your ethical body that you urgently need to change some wording on your website because you've mentioned something that perhaps doesn't align with their code of conduct, an honest mistake somewhere along the lines, and you need to get that off your website fast, how quickly is it going to get off? How quickly is that edit going to be made? And I think in a moment we'll talk about, can you make this edit yourself? Do you have access to make that? But knowing the responsiveness and having an expectation around that, I think is really, really, really important, just to cover your basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all pointing to the fact that if you are going with a one-person band. I was going to say one-man band, but I'll use the term one-person band. Just a single designer who is working on their own. For a business website, unless this person is very, very well informed and has a lot of processes in place, it could be quite difficult. Obviously, if the person becomes ill or isn't available or goes on holiday, you can't change anything on your website. And I guess that really brings me to why full access matters. The idea that you, the user of the website, have admin rights and can go in and make the changes yourself.
Yeah, incredibly important. And, one-person web design companies are fantastic. In fact, when I started my career almost 30 years ago, that is where I was. I was a freelancer and I built websites for companies. Now in our team, we have just shy of 20 people working every day to look after our clients. And so it's incredibly important if you're deciding to work with a freelancer or a smaller business that not only do you have an expectation as to when something might be done if you need it done, but also that you have access to do it yourself. Because sometimes, frankly, it might be just quicker for you to go and do it. Now, I'm saying that on the full understanding that most of the listeners are not technically minded. But if it's something as simple as changing a phone number or an address, that's typically straightforward enough to do. Anything more complicated, that may not be within their comfort zone. That's totally understandable. But as part of the pre and post sales process, it's important to know that you have some level of access to the website should you wish to make a change. If you need to make an urgent change to the website, as we've said, maybe you've received an email or a call from your ethical body and they want you to change something to better align with their code of practice, and you are relying on a web designer, or perhaps at this point your web designer is just gone. You've already tried to contact them 2 months ago to make another change or add a new service to your website, and they've not been responsive. For some bizarre reason, your website is still online. You don't know how. You don't know when it's going to disappear because maybe you didn't, check that out when you were asking them initially. But if you have access to your website, you can go in and at least you can make those urgent changes. You can buy yourself some time. And not only that, having access to your website means that you can extract some of the information from your website if you decided you needed to start considering an alternative provider. So if you wanted to archive the images that you had used on your website, it's a lot easier to do that when you have administrative access to the website. So a key question here is, do I have access to my website to make changes whenever I want? But do I have your full support if I need it, if it's a more complex change? But having full access to the website can only be a good thing for all the reasons we've discussed. It prevents you from being locked out if a designer becomes unresponsive. And it means that you can make those changes until a solution is found or if the designer is back in contact again. If your designer has gone to Spain for 2 weeks on a holiday and you needed a change the day before they went and they just weren't checking their emails, at at least during that 2-week process, you could get in there and you could make the change. Or if you knew somebody who was technically minded, you could share your logins with them and they could make the change. And at least you wouldn't have to wait 2 weeks in order to get it done. So having that access allows you to be, it's a safety net. It allows you to make those urgent changes if you're not comfortable in making changes on a day-to-day basis. If you're comfortable in making a change on a day-to-day basis, it empowers you to keep your website alive and changing and moving with your practice as your practice evolves, as you do more CPD, as you learn new things, do more qualifications. And that's incredibly important from a search engine point of view. But having the access can only be a good thing. And it's something that you need to know very early on if you are going to get it. And if you're not, I would be asking some questions as to why you won't get it.
Yes, absolutely. And I do take your point about single website designers being really, really good. You made a very good point there. Now, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this, because certainly as I've sat here listening, I've learned quite a lot, and I'm hoping that the listener has as well. And I think it's worth mentioning that Daragh has shared his expertise on topics such as blogging to help showcase your skills and expertise in the website, search engine optimization, also known as SEO, to improve your online visibility and help potential clients find you, and working with a web designer to ensure a smooth and effective collaboration. And if you're interested in hearing more from Daragh, if you go to counselingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. This special edition sits between episode 334 and 335. And on the show notes page, you'll find links to the other 5 conversations that Daragh and myself have had about really important topics and information about making your website as attractive and as findable as possible. So it just goes for me to say, Daragh McLaughlin, thank you again for joining us.
Fantastic, Rory. Great to talk today, and I hope all the listeners got some value from that. Looking forward to chatting again in the near future.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counselingtutor.com.